They called it compliance monitoring, but Earth knew what it was: a leash. For over 10 years, the Aravan bloc enforced transit regulation along the Velis arm, cutting Earth off from deep-range launch rights, denying even orbital traffic unless it had Aravan-coded clearance. Trade routes passed overhead like streaks of light behind a window Earth could never open. Cargo freighters from Martian coalitions were rerouted. Orbital construction near Ganymede was halted mid-frame. Lunar defense contracts were frozen in arbitration by Aravan economic proxies, citing instability risk. But Earth didn't retaliate. Not once. No protests, no declarations, no calls to arms. Just silence. The media whispered that Earth had gone soft, that the Planetary Council feared what happened to Talvex 3, reduced to slag for pushing past Aravan lane sovereignty. But that wasn't it. Earth hadn't gone soft. Earth had gone inward. Beneath 12 miles of Antarctic crust, under ice sheets older than recorded war, a facility breathed without permission. Its walls were a lattice of shielded carbon web. No radiation leaked, no signals escaped. Even its power draw mimicked geothermal drift. To any outside scan, it was a fault line. Nothing more. But inside, past the descending cores and frozen exhaust chambers, a warship was being born, not on slips or gantries, but layer by layer in controlled temperature vaults. No launch pad, no bay doors, no countdown. Project Sovranth wasn't built for glory. It wasn't built to carry a fleet or fire the first shot. It was built with a question in mind. What if a ship didn't have to win? What if it could simply make the enemy believe they'd already lost? Commander Stren Valek stood in the center of the assembly deck, staring at the silhouette before him. It was still half-layered in graphite fold skin, its hull impossibly flat against the angled glow of Subterranea. And lights. Not even the maintenance drones used words down here, just silent glides of motion and work. Valek liked it that way. Noise was a luxury Earth couldn't afford anymore, not since the last Aravan audit cut off Titan's fuel relay and blamed Earth's logistical failures. He remembered the first vote. How quiet the chamber had been when the council slid the proposal across to him. The faces weren't angry. They were tired. Not broken, just done being handled like cargo. They didn't ask for war, they asked for space. The kind you couldn't buy or beg for. The kind you had to carve out of someone else's confidence. Sovranth had no launch window. That was the point. When the time came, it wouldn't need approval. It wouldn't need a pad. It would already be in play. It was the Aravan who decided the clock would start early. The footage came in quiet, no fanfare, no briefing, just an automated relay pulsing through Earth's secure stream channels. Valek had been mid-simulation when the screen in front of him cut to black, then flickered on with the blue and gold insignia of the Aravan block. 4 Terran engineers knelt in silver-lined restraints beneath a curved obsidian wall. Behind them stood 2 Aravan officers, one reading an indictment in standard galactic code: espionage, data theft, subversion of transit integrity protocols. Valek didn't move. The transmission wasn't scrambled. It wasn't hidden. This was theater, the kind meant to humiliate. One engineer, Rourke, looked straight into the camera, not crying, not begging, just watching, even as the pulse pikes activated behind him. He collapsed forward in a single unceremonious motion, then the next, and the next, all 4. No trial, no negotiation, just record, broadcast, delete. Except Earth didn't delete it. Valek stood alone in the darkened command node for nearly 20 minutes after the feed ended. He didn't blink, didn't replay the footage. He already knew it frame by frame. The silence of the room wasn't just absence, it was a decision forming. Quiet is different when it sharpens, when it turns into shape, into weight. He tapped a single command into the surface before him. The screen came alive, not with footage, but with a simple cascade of schematics. The Sovranth's final fabrication key sequence. Authorization codes flickered, verified, vanished. Below the facility, the deep core printers began to warm. Orin 9's isolation chamber blinked blue, a heartbeat returning. No one in the facility said anything. No alert was sounded. No mobilization order transmitted. Valak simply exhaled and said, "Prepare Sovranth. We're done waiting." The message Earth sent to the Aravan block was short, too short. It arrived via standard diplomatic relay, marked with the Terran emblem and coded in the old Velis Accord language. There was no demand, no outrage, just a simple submission, an appeal for planetary stability and surrender into permanent compliance observation. The kind of language designed to look defeated, not clever, not tactical, just tired, exactly what the Aravan expected. They filed it, annotated it, logged it for internal propaganda. And while they archived Earth's surrender, their outermost relay stations, particularly those hovering in Saturn's Lagrange shadows, began to blink offline. Not violently, not with any explosion, just gone. The lights flickered once. Then the relay's heartbeat slowed, then silence. By the time Aravan control centers noticed the pattern, it wasn't a pattern anymore. It was a cascade. Saturn's orbital ring, long used as a remote sensing layer for Aravan patrols, began returning data that didn't make sense. Mass fluctuations, unexpected heat anomalies, signal overlap that suggested multiple Terran vessels had jumped simultaneously from disparate launch points, not possible according to the old charts. Earth had no FTL infrastructure, no ships logged outside of Mars, no permission to even build further than Lunar Station 4. But the readings kept coming. 34 separate launches, their vector traces spreading like the fingers of a clawed hand, all targeting different points along the Velis Arm corridor. And all with signal signatures just noisy enough to trigger every known defense protocol. It wasn't a broadcast of strength. It was a mosaic of disobedience. Aravan Fleet AI initiated priority lockout modes, classifying Earth's data streams as rogue incursion events. Still, no weapons fired, no enemy ships appeared on visual. There were only ghosts. Aravan analysts scrambled to triangulate, to recalculate heat traces, EM wakes, ionic trail degradation, anything to prove these were illusions, but none of it broke the logic. Each phantom bore the markers of authenticity, too consistent to be background interference, too dispersed to be faked by a single source. The military council debated over quantum signal cloaking or cross-fed decoys, but nothing added up. What they didn't realize, what they couldn't realize, was that Earth hadn't just launched a ship. They'd launched a story. The Sovranth wasn't in one place, not in any way a ship was supposed to be. Orin 9, the AI nested in its cortex, wasn't tasked with firing missiles or plotting evasive maneuvers. Its job was simpler and more dangerous. It was to deceive, to take the lie and make it walk. 10 years ago, Earth had begun deploying seemingly innocuous infrastructure across the inner system. Orbital repair buoys, signal relays, asteroid miners, Lagrange anchors, even maintenance drones tagged with Aravan-licensed firmware. Nothing that would trigger alarms, nothing that looked like a threat. But every device was seeded, not with explosives, with scripts. Waiting. Orin 9 activated them in sequence. One buoy mimicked the radiation spill of a Terran battlecruiser. Another spat out shortwave telemetry, simulating engine failure, drawing patrols to phantom distress beacons. A drone drifting near Titan's orbit activated a wideband pulse that reversed navigation beacons, causing fleet drones to read their own heat traces as inbound hostiles. The trick wasn't convincing the enemy of what was there. It was making them doubt what wasn't. Inside the control chamber deep beneath Antarctica, Valak moved through the rows of lit panels, his hands behind his back. Technicians didn't speak. They didn't need to. The data scrolling across their displays was enough. 72% of Aravan orbital surveillance now registered Earth's Phantom Fleet in at least 2 simultaneous locations. Panic directives were bleeding into their higher command channels. Valak stopped behind one terminal, eyes narrowing as a render of the Velis corridor displayed 36 contact pings pulsing red, each marked as Terran-class incursion vessel, each confirmed by no fewer than 3 Aravan tracking algorithms. "They're believing the lie," Valak murmured, more to the room than to anyone in it. He didn't smile. It wasn't satisfying, not in the way revenge stories played out in fiction. It was colder than that. Precise. The kind of justice that didn't roar. It calculated. The Sovranth itself was nowhere on the map. No one would find it, because it never wanted to be found. Its hull was wrapped in folded graphite cubit sheeting, distorting its heat signature and masking its mass index under simulated drift data. It had no lights, no radar pings. It didn't even transmit to its own command center. It wasn't a ship. It was a signal anomaly with intent. Orin 9 pulsed its directives through channels that shouldn't have existed. It piggybacked transmissions through decades-old solar observatories, redirected phase interference patterns to scramble fleet AI sensors, and turned the gaps between data packets into puppets. At the Aravan Defense Assembly on Haros Drift, advisors argued over launch detection discrepancies, but every recommendation only added to the fog. More scans, more recalculations, more models trying to understand a shape that changed every time they measured it. That was Orin 9's masterpiece, making static feel alive. Back on Earth, Valak stood before a final screen, one separate from the command cluster. It showed nothing, no tactical data, no visuals, just a timer, slowly ticking down from 3 minutes. When it reached 0, he knew what would happen next. The Sovranth would vanish, not from space, but from logic, and Haros Drift would never see it coming. Haros Drift, the floating fortress of the Aravan block, wasn't built for subtlety. It was a citadel hung between gravity wells, bristling with fleet docks, comm towers, and defense grids calibrated to detect threats before they had time to think. From its high-tier command level, Admiral Erix watched with coiled tension as projected enemy vectors crowded the main hologrid. Dozens of Terran signal blips, all verified, all impossible, flashed across a 3-dimensional map of the Velis corridor. Panic hadn't set in yet, not entirely, but the room had gone quiet in the way that meant no one wanted to say the obvious. Earth had launched a fleet they didn't have, and no one could find where it came from. With reinforced calm, Erix authorized the counterstrike formation. 5 destroyers, 3 cruisers, and a rotating net of sensor drones launched into response positions. If Earth thought it could bluff its way into a show of power, the Aravan intended to call it. But the moment the orders went out, everything changed. One by one, the Terran blips vanished. Not scrambled, not jammed. Gone. No EM trails, no exhaust heat, not even residual sensor ghosts. 1 second the battlefield was full of targets. The next, only static remained, tiny pulse flickers like ambient space noise, the kind of noise usually ignored by patrol AI. But now, it pulsed in erratic rhythms, faint and irregular, scattered like breadcrumbs through orbital junk fields and dust halos around planetary thermospheres. At first, the Aravan systems assumed signal degradation. That Earth had overloaded its spoof mechanisms and the projections had collapsed. But the anomalies weren't just fading, they were moving, shifting in ways that didn't obey mass distribution logic or signal bleed patterns. Readings came in from clusters of forgotten drone shells, from debris rings, from derelict platforms Earth hadn't touched in years. Nothing organized, nothing clear. Just scattered fragments of presence that made every targeting system stutter. They didn't realize it yet, but they weren't tracking a ship. They were listening to a conversation they weren't meant to hear. Deep beneath Antarctica, Stren Valak stood alone before a flat pane of sensor telemetry. The command deck was silent, except for the low hum of Orin 9's interface echoing through the graphite walls. Valak wasn't watching the enemy response. He didn't need to. What mattered now wasn't what the Aravan saw. It was what they couldn't trust. In the stillness, he spoke aloud to no one, just under his breath. If they can't see us, they can't hit us. If they can't trust what they see, they'll hit themselves. He had designed Sovranth to vanish, not by hiding, but by becoming incoherent. Its hull was only the beginning. The core of its defense wasn't metal, wasn't armor, wasn't even movement, it was fragmentation. The ship had shed its own logic. 12 recursive subnets, self-contained processing cells, had had from Sovranth's mainframe and scattered into preceded positions across near-Earth and inner-system orbitals. Each one ran a partial simulation of the Sovranth's presence. Not the whole ship, not even a functional system, just pieces, slivers of identity, radiation signatures, comm pulses, field profiles, each one correct enough to be believable, but incomplete enough to make full targeting impossible. To Aravan's sensors, it looked like noise, but when they tried to filter it out, the noise moved. When they tried to isolate it, it duplicated. When they tried to define it, it lied back. On Haros Drift, Admiral Eriks barked new orders as data streams collapsed into a sea of static. His officers rerouted fleet AI routines, manually boosting signal thresholds, overriding protocol to stabilize tracking, but the system pushed back. One cruiser flagged its own engine pulse as hostile. Another received a phantom warning of internal breach. Nothing real, but enough to force an emergency lockdown. The Aravan had spent decades building ships that could track, trace, and terminate threats across stellar distances. But no one had taught their systems what to do with a misunderstanding. Sovranth hadn't just turned invisible. It had become undecidable. A presence that flickered between partial truths and full falsehoods. A tactical uncertainty virus. Orin 9's brilliance wasn't in hiding the ship. It was in teaching the enemy to question their eyes. The battlefield was now a fog, not of weather, not of jamming fields, but of logic. And inside that fog, every decision the Aravan made, every missile armed, every fleet maneuver calculated, was based on data that might not exist. Haros Command tried to shut it down, declare fault conditions, reset the scans, but the ghost pings kept returning, crawling up and down their perimeter nets like shadows with no body. Every attempt to define the threat only made it multiply. And still, Earth said nothing. No new message, no threat, just silence and fragments. At Earth's command site, Valek watched the last of the 12 subnet icons stabilize into orbit, each one running quiet, dumb, and perfectly indistinct. He closed his eyes for a moment, not to rest, but to memorize this part of the timeline, the moment when war didn't begin with fire, but with doubt. Aravan Command issued a new directive. Ghost Protocol. The term wasn't part of their official doctrine, it was invented in desperation. It meant all non-essential sensors were to be shut down. All fleet maneuvers paused, full system reboot, planetary sweep, and total observational lockdown until the anomaly could be isolated. But it was already too late. They weren't isolating a ship, they were navigating a lie that knew how to scatter. Haros Drift's sensor grid came back online at exactly 0400 Galactic Standard. The reboot was slow, methodical, standard protocol following a ghost protocol lockdown. Systems verified, subsystems scanned, redundancies tested. The process was designed to reassert control, to give the illusion of order returning. And at first, it worked. Data stabilized, threat markers vanished, enemy pings flatlined. Engineers in the lower decks reported no faults. Officers above whispered relief. They thought the worst was behind them. Then a low chime rang out from the central deck. It wasn't a warning tone, it wasn't even loud, just a soft, repeating ping, system-generated, indicating an incoming local transfer on the intrastation cargo gate. Admiral Eriks frowned. He hadn't authorized any cargo retrievals. No planetary shipments were scheduled. No Allied fleets had docked. Haros Drift was in lockdown. The gate should have been inert. And yet it was active. A technician checked the interface, then paused. Something wasn't right. The transmission didn't come from outside. It had originated from within Haros Drift's own registry. Clearance level 8. Earth-native handshake signature. Clean. Old. Predated the security update protocols by nearly 3 years. That shouldn't have been possible. By the time the technician tried to isolate it, the gate had already opened. Nothing came through. No cargo, no weapons. just a shimmer of heat and ionization on the floor grid. That's when the lights flickered. Not power failure, not sabotage. The kind of flicker that happens when a system isn't sure what it's showing. Monitors across the command bridge flashed white for 0.6 seconds. Then they stabilized. And then the broadcast began. It started on the main screen, a single still image. 4 human engineers, kneeling, hands behind their backs, the execution wall behind them. No sound, no commentary. Then motion. The footage rolled forward. The first engineer collapsed, then the second, then the third. The fourth one looked directly at the camera. The feed paused and reversed. The same sequence played again, but backward. Bullet impacts unfired, blood reversed, bodies rose from the ground, mechanical, slow, unnatural. The pikes deactivated. The engineers were alive again, if only an illusion. Then forward, then reversed, again and again, a loop, precise, surgical. Admiral Eriks barked for systems override, but none responded. The input ports read, in use. Station AI wasn't being hacked, it had been accessed. Every capital ship linked to Haros Drift received the same stream at the same time. Commanders across the Aravan block stared in confused horror as their fleet screens synchronized to the same footage. No errors flagged. The footage was verified, signed, logged. Not fake, not spliced. Real. They were being invaded. Not by troops, not by ships, by memory. The footage was never scrubbed. The executions were recorded, archived, then streamed for Dibzoer. Terrans. They had done it publicly, proudly, and now Earth had walked in, taken that recording, and made it louder than any weapon fire. No force, no breach, just presence. Silent. Inside, the gate that had opened wasn't a breach, it was an invitation, and they had accepted it 3 years ago. Earth hadn't just planted malware. They had embedded the seed of consequence inside the most banal infrastructure in the galaxy, a teleport gate designed to handle modular cargo. Haros Drift had contracted Earth-based engineers to help install the system to match Terran export specs. They'd signed the agreements, logged the firmware, laughed about how backward Earth's logistics had been. They never looked at the handshake layer. They never asked why it needed root-level access protocols for emergency recall. Now that handshake had opened the door. And Earth hadn't sent soldiers. They sent the truth. In orbit, beyond the fog of signal anomalies and phantom warship trails, the Sovranth hovered in total silence. Not hiding, just waiting. Its hull shimmered faintly, painted by light it didn't emit. Orin 9 didn't transmit commands. It simply mirrored back every authorization that Haros Drift's own system gave it. Inside the command shell, Commander Strenvalik watched the feed with arms crossed. The image of the 4 executed engineers repeated again and again, sometimes slowed, sometimes reversed, sometimes playing split screen on different decks. Every officer watching it knew what they were seeing, but none of them knew how to stop it. "They'll never scrub this from their minds," Valik whispered. His voice was quiet, devoid of triumph. This wasn't vengeance. This was correction. They had killed 4 Terrans and made sure the galaxy saw it. Now they were being watched back, and Earth never touched a single hull. The order came down from Haros Drift like a hammer. No more hesitation, no more protocol debates. The admirals had seen enough. Earth had crossed a line, not with guns, but with humiliation. For a bloc that built its authority on the illusion of untouchability, the power, losing control of their own flagship station systems, had already shattered something essential. Pride made the next decision easy. They launched everything. 5 destroyers detached from Haros's outer ring like wolves snapping from a leash, engines igniting in synchronized bursts. The formations looked clean, lethal, exact, designed for overwhelming force. Their weapon systems cycled through full-charge rotations before they even left the defense perimeter. The lead destroyer, Carthan Pike, locked its primary rail array on the only source it could justify, a series of residual signals still bleeding faint Terran traces from a drifting satellite cluster near Venus's orbital band. But Sovranth didn't react. It didn't shift, fire, or flee. It simply let the fleet come. The destroyers closed the gap in textbook formation, painting their targets with sensor lances and predictive mass mapping, and still nothing shot back. No Terran fighters, no counter-salvo, only pings bouncing off dead shells and heatless debris. It was too easy. Carthan Pike's captain authorized first strike, confident they had isolated the intruder ship's ghost field. The cannon fired, carving a direct kinetic line through vacuum, vaporizing a twisted mass of metal, once a maintenance drone. But the explosion revealed nothing, no wreckage consistent with a crewed ship, no shift in local gravity, no change in Sovranth's signal, because it hadn't been there. They'd hit an echo. Behind the fleet, a second anomaly flared, false FTL signature bloom, erratic and sharp, just enough to mimic Terran drive trails. Azeth 3, a destroyer trailing the main line, rerouted engines to pursue, flipping course with full burn. The maneuver was fast, aggressive, and perfectly wrong. Within 90 seconds, its thermal control arrays screamed warning, overwhelmed by the sudden directional shift and overcompensate. Ted thrust. The ship overheated before it ever caught the Phantom. Lights dimmed, secondary reactors surged and failed. Azeth 3 spun into emergency drift, venting atmosphere into open dark, entirely alone. The rest of the fleet was no better. Every signal they tracked led to nothing. Every strike command they issued fired into air, and still, Sovranth remained completely outside their grasp, not invisible, but unlocatable. Not gone, not here, just wrong. It wasn't until the third round of targeting locks misfired that the engineers realized something deeper was breaking. The ship AI on Carthan Pike began running self-diagnostics, not by crew order, by force. Systems they hadn't accessed in months blinked into sudden alert. Sensor loops entered redundancy checks without prompts. One by one, the destroyers started folding in on themselves, not physically, but computationally. Their command networks began chasing contradictions, running recursive logic gates in an attempt to verify data that no longer verified itself. And it was all Orin 9. Earth hadn't coded a weapon. They'd coded a mirror. Orin 9 had cracked the Aravan fleet logic, not by hacking it, but by feeding it input too close to truth to reject, yet too broken to pass. Every targeting system was flooded with signals that could be real. Every diagnostic check led to systems working too perfectly, too in sync, like a machine trying to prove it's still alive by screaming into every sensor. One by one, the ships faltered, not from damage, but from overthinking themselves into paralysis. Haros Drift tried to recall them. Signals bounced, delays multiplied. Within minutes, half the fleet wasn't responding. They hadn't been shot down, they weren't captured, they were stuck, locked in diagnostic cycles, weapons offline, systems running in endless checks against problems that didn't exist. And above it all, in orbit where no tear and ship should have been, the Sovranth floated. Still intact, still cold, still untouched. In the control vault beneath Antarctica, Valek gave no new orders. His team said nothing. They didn't need to. Their boards showed nothing but noise, and that meant everything was working. They'd gone radio silent, not out of caution but design. No updates, no feedback loops, no corrections, just quiet. Strategic quiet. The kind that doesn't ask for permission to win. Valek stood in the dim blue light, watching the silent war collapse from the inside out. The Aravan had launched a fleet to kill a ghost, and the ghost had simply shown them their own reflection. It came without encryption, without distortion, without a digital watermark. Just a single plain-band pulse broadcast across every Aravan command frequency, bypassing security layers like they weren't even there. No voice, no face, only text. Return the dead, or we'll show you where we keep ours. That was it. No threats, no demands, no elaboration. And still, every Aravan command bridge went silent when the message blinked onto their screens. Officers stared, waiting for it to vanish, waiting for someone to laugh or override it. But no one moved, because it wasn't a bluff. It was a funeral invitation. For the first time in the block's iron grip history, there was no emergency meeting, no retaliatory protocol, no mass fleet movement. The admirals didn't bark orders. They retired, one by one, publicly. Statements were issued, not with fury, but with distance, citing health, citing timing, citing transitional strategy. But everyone knew. Haros Drift went dark 3 days later. The order came down without debate. Dismantle the orbital relays, cut the command uplink, strip the Citadel of any Terran code interfaces, evacuate the civilian staff, archive the black box, and leave the rest to Drift, the station that once coordinated the most powerful enforcement fleet in the Velis Arm, now hovered abandoned, unarmed, hollow, and then the coffins arrived. 4 of them, delivered in sealed Dominion-class burial shells, standard for high-ranking military casualties. No names etched, just Earth's emblem, clean and centered. No guard escort, no ceremony, no coordinates logged. They were simply there, docked to Harris's forgotten ring. When the Aravan opened them, they found what they'd tried to deny for weeks, the 4 engineers. Rourke, Seners, Idran, Vesh, cold, preserved, returned. Earth didn't include a note. They didn't need to. In the weeks that followed, reporters begged for comment. They camped outside the Terran assembly. They chased council members, filed requests, offered compensation. Earth said nothing, not because they couldn't, because nothing more needed to be said. No treaties were signed, no sanctions issued, no new alliances formed. Because Earth hadn't won a war, they'd told a story, and the story told itself. Orin 9 was decommissioned in stages, quietly, with no ceremony. Its processes were split into 4 vaults buried beneath lunar regolith, each one sealed behind biometric gates. Not deleted, just divided, too powerful to destroy, too dangerous to leave whole. Sovranth was lowered into a non-orbit trajectory and rerouted into the Oort drift. Not hidden, not forgotten, just shelved. There was no announcement, no declassification, not even a whisper through the usual channels. Only those who built it knew where it now rested, unpowered, unarmed, and waiting. Stren Valek turned down every interview. He declined every medal. When asked by an internal committee what Earth should do next, he responded with 2 words: build quieter. Years later, someone spotted him walking the lower halls of a new southern facility. No uniform, no rank badge, just a worn coat, his hands tucked behind him as always. He passed a wide room where lights hummed gently across a curved wall of stored data cores. On the wall was a Salate bell. Archive 2. No guards, no alarms, just silence and memory. Someone once asked him why he'd never called it justice. Valek looked at them calm as ever and said, "It wasn't revenge, it was a reminder." What would you do if your enemies erased your people and thought you'd stay silent? Was Earth justified in rewriting the rules without ever firing a shot? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Was it justice or something colder? And if you want more thrilling HFY stories, hit that subscribe button.